Welcome to episode 207 of the Disorganized Wizards Club podcast. My name is Alex. I'm joined as always by Adam.
Hey, what's up?
And Cam.
How's it going?
We're a group of Ottawa-based players, played just about anything and everything we can qualify for. We talk about decks, tournaments, stories, just about anything to help you and ourselves get better at Magic.
Well, historic Magic, at least lately. That's the plan. We put in a lot of time grinding out this format, played a lot of different decks, been having a great time in Versus. The format is pretty wild.
Yeah.
There is a bunch of stuff happening in historic.
It is a bit of a Wild West right now, honestly. I've been playing against a huge, wide array of different decks in all of my play sessions. I guess there's kind of a couple decks that seem like a bit of the top tier of the format, but even before we recorded the episode, I was thinking about putting together a tier list, but it's just too hard to figure out because I think the power level of a lot of decks are all so close. It's a little difficult at the moment to divide things up into actual tiers.
I don't even think it's reasonable to start talking about a tier list when, like, every day on Twitter, someone has some new idea and they make some new deck and tweet about how they smashed with it. Like, I've been checking out Croaky's Twitter for some brews, and he has like a bunch of different decks that he's been doing well with all of them. So yeah, I don't even think the brainstorming brewing phase from the Kaladesh cards is over yet, let alone sorting the format into tiers phase.
Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of pretty big historic events coming up this weekend. So I assume those events will do a lot to shape the format. The most important of which, though, is this Saturday, November 21st, the DWC Take Our Money series returns with historic. Got a double elimination event. Winner takes all, $100 up for grabs, noon Eastern start time. And the three of us will be battling along, trying to defend our money. If anyone's able to beat us during the event, we'll have bounty prizes, which are some MTG Arena codes. So if you're looking to play some historic in a fun, casual event, but with some actual stakes on the line, you can sign up on MTG Melee right now. And you can find links to it in the description for this episode on whatever platform you're listening to, or right on our website, dwc.gg.
You know, it's kind of silly of us to have made a double elimination tournament. Considering that we're a group of three, if we make a double elimination tournament, one of us might get knocked out if we lose to the other two. But if we make a triple elimination, then we'd all be fine.
You got to account for us beating each other, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the only way I'm picking up a loss.
Well, I mean, like Swiss pairings cut to top 8 is pretty much already triple elimination, right? By default.
Yeah, but I mean, if we were a group of 2, double elimination makes sense. If we're a group of 4, got to go to like quadruple elimination. That way, none of us could lose.
Quad eliminations.
Yeah. I guess we got it. It is called the Take Our Money, right? Like, we can't falsely advertise.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta come get it.
Not this time.
Yeah, these events are sweet.
They're always a lot of fun. Someone just walks away with a chunk of cash after a good day's battle.
And one of us has
they've all been really fun.
Yeah. And on our end, we have to hang our head in shame and message Stelly. I need an arena code. I lost.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I've got plenty banked up, so there's no way you guys could lose enough for us to go through them. So, well, I think we'll be fine. But yeah,
we should have played Swiss. We should have made it Swiss then, so I could go 06.
Yeah, I've been trying out a bunch of different decks in historic, and I've actually posted a couple YouTube videos to our channel. One for Mardu Vehicles, one for Rakdos Aggro. Might have another one going up later this week. If anyone wants to check that out, you can head to youtube.com/the Disorganized Wizards Club. You'll be able to find our channel, a bunch of sweet videos up on there. Trying to grow that channel too. So if anyone likes our content and wants to support us a little bit more, head on over to YouTube and subscribe to our channel. Might do a giveaway once we get our subs up. We actually hit 1,000 views on a video for the first time ever the other day, so that's pretty exciting.
That is.
Channel's growing, starting to pop off. So if anyone wants to check that out, head on over to YouTube.
Have you ever seen, I feel like it's a meme now. It was like a screenshot that turned into a meme, but it was some kid, he's like 8 or 9 years old. And he put a video on YouTube called the 0 subscriber special when he started his channel. And then he had another one called the 1 subscriber special. It's the little milestones.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that meme. It's so good. But before we get into the meat of the episode, also got to remember to shout out our sponsor, wizardtower.com. Check them out for all your Magic single needs here in Canada. I've got a lot of great stuff. wizardtower.com.
Yeah, you might not be able to find anywhere to play Historic in paper, considering it's not a format that exists in paper, which is really strange, but they got cards for everything else.
Cards for all your
Historic
favorite formats.
Yeah.
We dove into Historic again this week on DWC Versus, brought out some decks that have been performing well that we found on Twitter and a couple brews as well. And like we already said, I've been having a look in this format. It still feels really wide open. And I'm excited to see what happens at the DWC Take Our Money this weekend, plus all the SCG Historic events. Like, there's going to be a lot of Historic matches played in competitive environments. And we'll see if it can actually shape some sort of a metagame for the format because, like I said, I'm still running into a huge variety of decks. And nothing has really jumped out as like far and away ahead of everything else in the format, at least to me.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely still feels wide open. Some general trends, though, that I've been feeling that seem to somewhat restrict meta is that, especially with the introduction of cards from Kaladesh, it's starting to get that sort of old format vibe of like, there's enough very cheap, efficient cards that make the early game much more important, that make aggro decks much more potent. And so things are shifting kind of down the CMC curve, making kind of traditional control decks or slower decks a bit harder to play. I've definitely felt that the strongest things I've played against were aggro decks, and that I'm seeing a wider variety of successful aggro decks than other things.
Yeah, I'd say one of the biggest impacts that Kaladesh has had on the Historic format is exactly that. It's kind of opened up new avenues of aggressive builds in the format and kind of turbocharged the already existing aggro decks in the format. Huge pickups like Bomat Courier, which is just a aggro deck all-star for a variety of archetypes. Chandra, Torch of Defiance, has been really impactful so far as well. And, a card like Fatal Push can't be overlooked when it comes to aggressive decks as well. Like cheap decks like Mono Black Aggro kind of existed before in Historic, but it wasn't really too good. And now I'd consider it one of the better decks in the format. And all it really picked up was Fatal Push and Scrap Heap Scrounger, which is the final card I wanted to mention in my list of cards of aggressive cards that kind of turbocharge those archetypes. Scrap Heap Scrounger is a absolute powerhouse. But
Scrounger is all over the format. But yeah, like we'll spend some time talking about popular decks and then other decks that we think are kind of a trap. But you'll probably see a theme here that, I mean, Sultai is one of the popular decks. It's got cards that are banned in other formats. It's just an absolute powerhouse of the blue-green design from the recent years. But otherwise, all of the popular decks we're going to talk about are aggressively slanted, very cheap and efficient. And then all the trap decks we're going to talk about are the slower ones, trying to do bigger, over-the-top things, and they just can't keep up.
Yeah, exactly. So since you already mentioned it a little bit, Sultai Midrange, this is a deck that I think it's probably safe to say it was top tier of the format before Kaladesh, especially before the Omnath era of Historic, right before Zendikar Rising came out. I think, what was the last event before that there was for Historic? There was a pretty big one. We talked about it on the show, but...
Yeah, I can't remember the name.
Wasn't it a split format event? They played Standard and Historic, and first place was Omnath.
Yeah, that was the grand finals, but I'm talking about the... Maybe it was the same event. I don't know. Regardless, anyway, Sultai was a really popular deck before, and it's only gotten a little bit better by picking up Fatal Push. The card slots perfectly into the archetype. You're already a Fabled Passage deck, so you have a lot of potential with Fatal Push to get some fully powered ones going. Plays super well with Uro as well. And I mean, just the classic combo of Growth Spiral, Uro, Nissa is something you always have to have on your mind if you're going to be performing well in Historic right now. It's actually, I think out of all the decks I've played against, Sultai is the one I run into most consistently.
Yeah, probably because it's the top at MTG, but I don't even think it's particularly that great. It's fine, but I don't think it's like deserves a share of the meta it currently has.
Yeah. With the format so wide open, people trying to, still trying out a lot of new stuff. Like, I think a lot of players just kind of gravitate towards it because there's, the whole core of the deck is already there and there's not really any innovation on it with Kaladesh. It's not like we've completely warped the archetype at all or made major changes to the core build. It's just the same deck that's always been, plus fatal pushes.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you could argue that Extinction Event got somewhat of a buff in that it's a card they were already playing and is now a very good answer to Scrap Heap Scroungers.
Yep, for sure.
But yeah, just a deck that ramps to its huge brick walls. Like Nissa stops aggro decks pretty well. Earl buys you time. I can understand why it's kind of the biggest deck thriving in an aggro meta.
Yeah, I mean, and that is what the deck is good at, is just sort of grinding things out. I mean, if it can get there with the early cheap removal it has, the problem I had with it, for example, playing last night in Versus is you need that early removal to line up exactly and then also draw into your late game powerhouses, or you just kind of feel, I don't know, like it feels like you just flounder in the mid game after that if you're not careful. Like, it's easy to fall apart with that deck, it feels like. At least that was my experience.
Yeah, that's true. It will have draws that are just like growth spiral into removal spells, and you sort of run out of steam.
Yeah, but its late game is incredible. And also, I will say, Narset is an absolute house, even against the really low to the ground decks, because they do tend to draw a lot of cards and see a lot of cards. And so, in my experience, that card is actually very good. So,
I'm curious. I've seen some people discussing. Obviously, this is a historic only thing since Narset had rotated by the time Zendikar Rising entered Standard. But playing some of these double-faced spell lands, such as, I think Selendi Vision is one of them, but any of the ones with an instant or sorcery on the front, allows Narset to find you land drops, which is really interesting. And I think it's like a deck building angle that I haven't seen explored much.
Yeah. That was actually something I was thinking about the other day when I was looking at Sultai lists. Nice little bonus pick up for those decks for sure.
Mm-hmm. You still probably have to make sure that the cards aren't disrupting your plan or taking up too much room if you don't have Narset. But I've definitely lost games in the past when I was playing Narset all the time in Standard because, you have a hand of 7 or 8 cards full of these nut sorceries that Narset's been drawing, but you can't find a land.
Yeah.
Or Narset's like bottoming all these lands you need and you just keep bricking.
Yeah.
But yeah, interesting play there.
Sticking with decks that were popular in the format before, Mono Red Goblins still exist. Nothing's really changed. And I think we're kind of at the point now where just everyone knows how to beat this deck. And while it will still have, its crazy Muxus game ones, I think it's nowhere near as good as it was before. Every deck has Grafdigger's Cage now essentially in the sideboard as a plan for this deck. And a lot of the aggro decks can pretty easily kill goblins before they can actually get a Muxus into play.
Yeah, or even interfere with any of their setup. I mean, yeah, it's just not as scary as it was before, right?
Yeah, like pretty much every aggro deck in the format can easily kill a every single aggro deck in the format can easily kill the one drop. What's it called? Skirk Prospector. And without that card, casting Muxus on turn 5 or 6 isn't fast enough to keep pace with these aggro decks. So they really rely on Prospector to power out the Muxus, and it just doesn't happen anymore. The aggro decks are just chock full of ways to kill it. Fatal push is everywhere. And yeah, I think the deck has really lost a lot of steam.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that kind of makes sense. The deck always was Muxus or bust, right? It was focused entirely around that card. And so as a format gets bigger, as other people's early games get more refined, a strategy like that is going to drop off.
I'm not even sure it's a deck you can salvage because its plan is so linear and everything as well. And it might put you in a kind of awkward spot where you can't really do anything about the fact that now all the aggro decks just dunk on you for free. You know, like I don't think that deck can adapt really.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you. Yeah, I was going to say if I was looking to play a historic event this weekend, which I actually am. So I am looking to play historic events this weekend, and Goblins is not even remotely close to any of my choices. Yeah, it's last month's news.
Yeah, exactly. Although our Muxus tweet remains hype.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If anyone wants to see one of the greatest Muxus top decks of all time, you can head to our Twitter page at DWC Podcast 1, shoot us a follow, and then check out our pinned tweet. It's good stuff.
It's a good one.
Yeah. Another deck that it's not on our list, but we are talking about popular decks, and decks that were popular before. Judd Sacrifice. While this deck does still exist, it is another deck that I feel like has almost completely fallen off the face of the format.
Like, you never see it, yeah.
I've been playing the format, every single day for weeks now, and I played against Junsac for the first time this morning.
I don't know why they stopped playing it. Maybe they got tired of clicking through cat oven triggers. Maybe they just got distracted by shiny new cards. Maybe something actually changed and it's not well positioned. I'm not sure, but yeah, I haven't seen it at all.
Yeah,
I actually think the deck's probably still pretty good. I think it's just not popular currently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe it's just because it hasn't really changed at all since Kaladesh came out. And people are just still, wanting to try out new, exciting things in the format. Cat Oven Mayhem Devil isn't exciting anymore because we've all just, been through this for so long. It feels like
I've had to sacrifice enough food with Witch's Oven. I'm good, thank you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and it's also a deck that its removal package is the deck is kind of all so singular in that you play all these creatures and these sack outlets, and your removal is Mayhem Devil and Claim the Firstborn. That even something like Fatal Push, which this deck will have on 100% of the time, doesn't really fit in.
Yeah, so even with the amount of historic I've been playing, I can't even really say how good this deck is in the format anymore because I just haven't run into it at all.
Yeah.
So big old chat question mark here on Judd Sacrifice. Not really sure how this one exists.
I mean, I still play it. I still think it's fine, but again, it's hard to say because a lot of the times it feels like my matches with that deck are very one-sided that make it really difficult to say. I just, play a Yawgmoth's Bargain and they die.
Fair. Yeah.
But I mean, it still has that threat, so I feel like the deck still has very scary potential.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I might just play it on Saturday. I'm not sure.
Another deck that's still around, especially since Burning Tree got unbanned. Good old Gruul aggro. Just playing creatures and attacking. Casting Company, putting creatures into play, attacking.
Yeah, now that Burning Tree Emissary is back, this deck isn't going anywhere. It's still very good, real aggressive. It's one of those decks, though, that I'm not super excited about. Because, it's one of those decks where you get paired against it, and you're like, okay, this is Gruul. This is a pretty, not easy matchup, but, out of everything I've been playing, I never feel disadvantaged against Gruul. Which is maybe a mistake on my end, but I feel like I beat the deck pretty consistently.
Yeah, well, it's just so linear, and I don't think it's actually particularly great and historic. A lot of the new removal spells can interact with even your best threats, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your questing beasts can still get fatal pushed. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm not convinced the deck is good. It seems like such a port from Standard that it's still a holdover from when the deck was, in Standard and still is, but a major player in Standard. It feels like a holdover from that. I could be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, this was the best deck in Historic for a very long time in the early months of the format. And, Burning Tree Emissary got banned because of it. But
yeah,
I kind of feel like with how much the power level of the format has risen, it's kind of just surpassed Gruul. And
that's what I'm saying. Yeah. They have no interaction. They can't really, I don't know. It's still fine if you're looking to just get people dead, but I think Historic can easily always adapt, just as Standard can, to these decks.
Yeah, but they definitely Gruul definitely does have interaction, and they are an Embercleave deck too. So like they're going to steal some games from you. So it's definitely a deck you don't want to completely forget about. But it's it's not in my top 3 choices in the format right now, I'd say.
I mean,
yeah, I guess like fight spells. I just mean like there's a lot of decks that can sort of position themselves that they don't really care about that.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But there is always something to be said about Llanowar Elves letting you cast Company on turn 3.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like that's how this deck, like, that's what you're looking to do. Like, this deck just overruns people with early companies.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely does.
It's so different playing this deck if they cast no companies versus if they cast, like, even one.
Yeah, no doubt.
So, Stelly had mentioned earlier that Grafdigger's Cage is incredibly important in this format, and I think now is a good time to summarize why. The 4 decks we've talked about so far all have something that's stopped by Grafdigger's Cage.
Yeah.
Sultai, obviously, it stops Uro coming back, which is incredibly important to their late game and their resiliency. Goblins, it stops Muxus. Gruul, it stops Company. Jundsak, it stops Company and Cat and Citadel. And even other decks in the format. There's various Luris decks in the format. Cage stops them. Cage stops Marvel, even though we don't think it's that great. It is a deck that some people are trying. Like, don't forget your Grafdigger's Cages, kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If it doesn't hinder your main game plan, you should be playing it. Like I have Grafdigger's Cage in the sideboard of all my decks that are playing Scrap Heap Scrounger. And like I know it's a nombo, but it's just that important in the format.
Mm-hmm. And then the secondary thing, and this is one that I always forget to do when I pick up new decks in older formats. Like, I don't have that much experience playing older formats. I never played much Legacy. I never played much Modern. And Historic is kind of becoming like those formats. And a mistake I always made, and still sometimes make in Historic, is that I don't sideboard against hate properly. Because doesn't come up that much in Standard. So, for example, even earlier today, I was playing some deck that would have got shut off by Cage. And there was artifact and enchantment removal in my sideboard that I didn't bring in because my opponent's game 1 plan didn't involve important artifacts and enchantments. And I just blank on the fact that I basically have to board these in always because every opponent will have Cage.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely a really important point. I've even found myself doing that as well, where I like forget I should bring in a Braid and I don't. And then my opponent plays an artifact that's important to kill. And I'm like, oh yeah. Of course they're going to bring that in. Why didn't I think about this?
Yeah, exactly. So just remember that part of your sideboarding with popular decks and decks that can get hated out isn't necessarily sideboarding against your opponent's archetype or deck, but it's just sideboarding for the fact that you need to answer the hate that they will sideboard in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, so keeping with aggressive decks in the format, one of the biggest winners, definitely mono red aggro, picking up Chandra, Torch of Defiance, and Bomat Courier. This deck has been played pretty heavily by Crokies, the biggest Magic streamer. So it's gotten a lot of time in the sun, a lot of eyes on it, and of course, being a mono red deck, it's going to be incredibly popular on ladder. Lots of people playing it, trying to rank up fast or whatever. Definitely wouldn't, shame anyone for picking this as a top choice going into the weekend. I think the deck's really good. Yeah, I mean, not really.
I mean, Chandra is just such a powerful card. At the time she was spoiled and when she was in Standard, people were like losing their mind at just how powerful she was, and she has remained that powerful. And also, if you've never played with Bomat Courier, it is so much more than a 1/1 with haste. This thing is going to give you so much reach that red decks don't normally have. Its card advantage, unlike aggro decks, have really ever had access to. So they're just two absolutely massive pickups for the strategy.
Yeah, there isn't really too much depth we can go into on this deck because it's just mono red. Like,
yeah,
one I guess important fact about this deck is that it can easily sideboard a lot of Grafdigger's Cages and it not affect its game plan at all, which is not something to forget about. Whereas,
Yeah, that's
other aggressive decks that are playing Scrap Heap Scrounger, you have to sacrifice your Scrounger coming back in post-board games if you're bringing in Cage. And Mono Red just doesn't care about that at all. So, a little bonus for Mono Red there. But since we're talking about mono-colored aggressive decks still, Mono Black, big pickups with Fatal Push and Scrap Heap Scrounger. Posted about this deck in the article we put out on our website a couple weeks ago. As basically a complete port over from Pioneer. I saw Andrea Mengucci tweet about the list last week. He was streaming it and he was doing really well with it. I started to run into it a bit of it on ladder as well. And I mean, this is just another, low to the ground, really aggressive deck. Lots of recursive threats and a lot of removal too. Like this deck doesn't have issues killing anything. Murderous Rider goes a long way.
Yeah, I feel like that would be the main draw as to why I would pick Mono Black over Mono Red, is that, for example, things like Mono Green is another deck that Crokies has been popularizing. And Mono Green just has 5/5s and 4/4s and like creatures of such a large size that if you're playing Mono Red with your Shocks and Lightning Strikes, you're not going to get through. It feels like an absolutely awful matchup for Mono Red. So if you're expecting things like that, then just having a similarly aggressive plan, but with black removal, feels very natural.
Yeah. And the thing with this deck, too, is that I wouldn't say there's a lot of decks that have a lot of hate for it right now in the format. Like, if this was a popular deck in the format, I would expect to see a lot more like Legion's Ends floating around in sideboards. And a lot of the lists I've seen, aren't even playing that card. So this is a deck I would definitely keep my eye on. I mean, it like another huge benefit for this deck too is it gets to play the best castle for free, which is pretty huge.
Yeah, Castle Lochthwain giving card advantage too. I mean, it's no Bomek Courier, but it's still pretty good for aggro decks to draw cards.
Yeah, there are a few different ways you could build this deck too. I know the version I put together and the version Mengucci was tweeting about was, really close to the Pioneer version of the deck, playing, 12 1-drops, Scrap Heap Scroungers, Spawn of Mayhem, Rankles, Thoughtseize, Fatal Push, etc. Like 23, 24 lands.
Mm-hmm.
There's another version in the deck dump from this week for Historic that plays a lot of the same creatures. You've got the 12 1-drops, but we're also playing Scourge of the Sky Claves, Rotting Regisaur, with 4 Agadeem's Awakening in the main deck as well, which is not a card I actually had in my list because all of the creatures you were playing just come back on their own, so I didn't really feel like it was necessary. But in a version like this, when you have a really good 3-drop and a really good 2-drop, Rotting Regisaur, Scourge of the Skyclaves that, don't come back on their own and you would want to bring back. Agadeem's Awakening feels pretty at home here. Mm-hmm. Also, suiting up a Rotting Regisaur with a Demonic Embrace feels pretty good as well. There are a couple different takes you can go with the Mono Black strategy. I just realized this as well looking at this list. Pretty big pickup being able to play Leyline of the Void for free in the sideboard. Obviously, Leyline doesn't help you in matchups like Goblins, where Grafdigger's Cage is really good, but against, the wide array of graveyard decks that exist in the format, Leyline's pretty huge. And, people are coming expecting Grafdigger's Cage. No one's really prepared for Leyline, I feel, at the moment.
No, not at all. I can't even remember the last time I've seen one played against me.
Yeah.
I played against one earlier today. My opponent turned 0 to Leyline, and then they played a Grafdigger's Cage, so they were on a mull to 5. And then they missed land drops, and I killed them. It was great.
Nice. Yeah. And also, like, this is a card I was playing in the sideboard of my Mono Black list as well. Phyrexian Obliterator is a card that, a lot of the other aggro decks in the format just can't do anything about. We talked about Gruul aggro. We talked about Mono Red. Like, this card stops those decks in their tracks.
That is true, yeah.
Same thing with something like Mono Green, which we I think we alluded to a little bit earlier as a deck Crokies was streaming a lot. But Phyrexian Obliterator is just a wall.
Does Soulscar Mage get around Obliterator?
Soulscar Mage,
Does it still do damage, or does it do
Does.
damage as counters?
No, Soulscar Mage does get around it because it prevents the damage and does it in counters.
Oh, there you go. Not a problem for Mono Red.
So Mono Red does have a way around it.
Mono red unconcerned.
But
Maybe a little concerned.
Still
but I have
a
no-
little bit of hoops to run around. But yeah.
We talked about Mono Red. We talked about Mono Black. I've seen people playing combinations. There's various red black lists running around. Because maybe you want the black removal and you also want to draw cards with Bomat.
Yeah, this is actually, I put up a YouTube video playing Rakdos aggro in Mythic the other day, so you can check that out on our YouTube channel. My list was pretty heavily red-based. The only black cards in the main deck were 4 Unlicensed Disintegration and then the activations on Scrap Heap Scrounger. But we had more black cards in the sideboard. But the mana base was very heavily skewed towards red to support Goblin Chainwhirler.
Mhm.
But I'm thinking you could probably just not do that and be more black focused and drop the Chainwhirlers, and the deck would probably be better overall.
Yeah, I haven't actually seen many Chainwhirlers, and I haven't been casting them much myself, but trying to think if they have the potency they used to have in Standard in this historic format. Like, there's not that many X1s around, is there?
There are and there aren't. Like, we're going to talk about blue-white auras in a bit. There's a decent amount of
That's
X1s
true.
in there that
It's
are
very
nice
good
to
against
clean
blue-white
up.
auras.
Against mono black, all of their 1-drops are X1s.
Yeah. All right, never mind.
All the decks that play green are usually playing Llanowar Elves, but usually turn 3, the Llanowar Elves has already done its damage. So it's you want to kill that card on turn 1 or turn 2. So Chainwhirler is
makes
usually too slow in that regard. But cleaning up Bomat Couriers for free is pretty nice as well. But I did find in a lot of the matchups I was usually sideboarding out Chainwhirler. It's definitely nowhere near as format defining as it was when it was in Standard.
Mm-hmm.
That's for sure. So.
Well, what if I want to give up on red entirely? What if red-black is not enough colors for me? What if I want to play a 3-color aggressive deck, Stelly? Do you have any recommendations?
You should probably, I was going to say, yeah, you should do that, and you should play Marty Vehicles, because let me tell you, I love this deck. Another deck put on our YouTube channel, so you can check that video out. Got a lot of hype on Twitter as well. A few streamers picked up the deck and have been enjoying it a lot as well. I've had a lot of success with Marty Vehicles. Definitely still room for iteration on it. I don't think my mana base is anywhere near perfect. And I'm still not even sure if I should be playing Glorybringer or something like that. I haven't tried it yet. I've topped off my curve at Hazret and Chandra. But I've been really impressed with this archetype. And there is definitely something here. Although I haven't actually played a mirror match yet. So maybe it's just still flying under the radar.
Yeah, I don't think it's as popular as other aggro decks. Maybe that's just because it takes a lot of wild cards and people don't want to make Toolcraft exemplars, but it plays similarly to the other decks, just that I think it has the strongest curve. Like, it's the only deck with a 1-mana 3/2. Heart of Kirin hits absolutely like a truck. Well, it's a vehicle. Unlicensed pushes a lot of damage, and I think the biggest pickup that this deck didn't have when it was in Standard is Gideon Blackblade. That guy does a lot.
It is such a good curve, Heart of Kirin into Gideon Blackblade, because you don't even have to tick down on the Gideon to crew the heart first turn.
Yeah.
You just tap
I
Gideon.
made that
'cause
mistake once, but
yeah, comes in as a creature. You get to plus on your heart to give it lifelink, attack for 4. And then you have a 3-mana planeswalker sitting on 5 loyalty with a Heart of Kirin. It's like really, really good, let me tell you.
mhm.
And Gideon also just
also-
like plays pretty well with the other cards in the deck too. Like being able to just plus on a Bomat Courier to give it indestructible so you can keep attacking and putting cards under it is really great. I've been pretty impressed with the deck. So I wouldn't write this one off just yet.
Mhm. And even just his corner case, his ultimate, you can sometimes get to.
Oh yeah.
like red-black strategies, removal options that they don't usually have access to, right? Like something like an Adanto Vanguard, you usually can't answer, but I've been able to exile them with Gideon.
Yeah, I've exiled Uros, I've exiled Planeswalkers. It feels pretty good.
Obviously, you pay for it a bit in the mana consistency. I feel like haven't been as impressed with Chandra as I have been with Hazoret.
Yeah,
and if you take the Chandras out, you could relax the red restrictions in the mana base a bit because you are basically a white-black deck in the early game.
Yeah.
So there's some tuning there, but yeah, I mean, if you don't mind suffering a bit of a greedy mana base sometimes and want perhaps the most explosive deck, Mardu Vehicles is a lot of fun.
Yeah. Definitely still a lot of room for tweaking on this deck, and it is one I'm still working on. And I'm pretty sure it's my number one choice going into the events this weekend. So if you're coming out to play in the Take Our Money series this weekend, you're going to tune into the live stream. You'll most likely see me playing Mardu Vehicles. To wrap this up, let's talk about one of the better decks in the format, because we kind of mentioned it but didn't really dive into it. Blue-white auras, white-black auras, the Boggles decks of the format. One of the biggest winners, I'd say, from Kaladesh, picking up SRAM has been a huge boon for those decks. These decks are super consistent, really powerful, and I mean, if you just can't keep hands without interaction against these decks, or you're dead. Like, it doesn't matter how aggressive your start is. If you can't interact with them, you're dead.
I mean, there's even a lot of hands with multiple pieces of interaction that they will kill you through. Like the fact that they have 4 Alciad for Selfless Savior, and then maybe if you're blue, they have Dive Downs or perhaps Karametra's Blessings in both versions. There's blue-white and white-black versions floating around. Like, they have so much defense, and now they have 8 copies of cards that draw when they play their enchantments. Like, the deck just pops off.
Yeah, like I played a pretty frustrating match against blue-white auras, which is actually in the Rakdos aggro video on our YouTube channel if anyone wants to check out, where like in game 2, I killed everything they did, was trading, 1 for 1 or 2 for 1 in some scenarios, as there was a creature with an aura on it. And we got to a point where I had like a Chandra that was on low loyalty, and then they just played their Lurrus and put a Selfless Savior into play and put a enchantment on the Lurrus, and I just no longer could win that game. After feeling so incredibly ahead the entire game, killing all their stuff, and then they just assembled the Lurrus Savior, and then I just couldn't win anymore.
It's definitely not the most impressive part of the deck. The impressive parts are like these huge creatures that just kill you, but the fact that they have like a late game lock where they can basically eternally protect a Lurrus so that they never lose that source of card advantage is something that other Lurrus decks just don't have, and it's very powerful. Yeah, so I mentioned there's a blue-white version and a white-black version. I would play the blue-white version, and that's my recommendation to anyone looking to pick up one of these lists. I think it has more powerful enchantments in Curious Obsession and Staggering Insight. I think
you weren't a huge fan of Hopeful Eidolon, correct?
Yeah. The other reason I would play blue-white is because I think white-black has some like internal inconsistencies in its deck building. So outside of the fact that you can't play those blue enchantments, the core of the deck is the same. It's the white, like SRAM, Core Spirit Dancer, all that glitters, and then enchantments. The protection creatures are all white, etc. But in a Boggles deck that's trying to suit up something huge while ignoring its opponent and attacking, it feels kind of strange to step away from that to play Fatal Push and Thoughtseize. And while they are amazing interaction, I don't know if Boggles decks are known for wanting to interact.
Yeah.
So that seems like a pull in the wrong direction. And most of the white-black lists I've seen have been playing Hateful Eidolon as well, as Adam mentioned. And that card also feels like a deck-building concession to me. So I get the idea.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a fail-safe in that if they do answer one of your huge suited-up creatures, you'll draw a bunch of cards because all of the auras will be leaving as well. And that'll let you refuel and rebuild. But that's like admitting that your game plan is going to go wrong. Like, your entire deck is built to prevent that from happening.
Yeah.
Like,
it's a really weird build that way. I think your argument here is very good.
the fact that you're playing Alcy out of Life's Bounty and Selfless Savior are making your Hateful Eidolon worse. Like I played against this deck multiple times. I played with it on Versus. I've never seen a Hateful Eidolon trigger because you're not using your enchantments like aggressively as removal. So if they just cut that card for something else, white-black would be a lot better. And if you're cutting that card from the main deck, the black enchantments aren't that good, and the rest of your black cards are in the sideboard, so I would just play white-blue.
Yeah, I agree with all your points. Like, the main draw for white-black is, access to Thoughtseize, Fatal Push, and you get a significantly better mana base. But I think all of those things you gain are just heavily outweighed by the options the blue cards give you. Like, Curious Obsession and Staggering Insight are just, I think, way too important for the deck. And even in card choices, like white-black plays Angelic Gift, which I don't know if anyone actually knows what this card does, but it's a two mana white enchantment that gives your creature flying.
Yeah.
And you draw a card.
Hold on. It draws a card when it ETBs, please.
Okay. Dude, this
That's
card,
very important.
But if you play blue, you just get to play the blue Cartouche, which is the same card, but you actually get +1/+1, which is just like miles better.
Yeah.
Let's be real. So
yeah, it's better.
Yeah, just play blue-white. You even get like Dovin's Veto in the sideboard, which is huge for some matchups as well. Like I think the blue-white version of the deck is infinitely better.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
One time I did get pounded by a Myra's Grasp Hateful Eidolon, though it felt so bad.
Yeah, no, that definitely works.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something there because people have been playing the white black version, working on it, advocating for it, and maybe you disagree with my points and you like the interaction that it gives, but if I'm looking to boggle someone, I'm putting on my boggle goggles and I'm tunnel visioning on blue and white cards.
Yeah, I agree. You got it. If you're going to play boggles, play boggles. Don't play Jund with some boggles-esque elements.
Yeah, don't play Jund enchantments.
Yeah. What are you playing today? Jund enchantments? With
Jund pants,
push.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to move away from the better deck in the format here, and we're going to move into our section of Historic, which we would consider the don't waste your wild card section of this episode. Some decks that are definitely traps. And if you're wondering if you should spend wild cards on them, you definitely shouldn't. And we're going to tell you why.
Like, if you get a call, if your phone rings, right, and maybe you're bored, normally you ignore it because there's a lot of spam callers, but today you're bored, you decide to answer it. You pick it up. It's a guy from Nigeria. He's claiming to be a prince. He says, I'm going to inherit a fortune. I'll send you a bunch of wild cards when I get them, but I need you to mail me some wild cards. Building these decks would be an equivalent waste.
Yeah. And I realize that we're 2 weeks into this new format now, and there's a very good chance you might have already made the mistake of spending your wild cards on it. And that us telling you this is going to just be rubbing salt in the wound.
Okay, well, hold on. There is a potential upside here, though, in that, of note, these decks might be on the precipice of doing something.
That is true as well.
Yeah.
There's promise in these archetypes, and I'll discuss some of the specifics, but I feel like people are just going about them a bit wrong at the moment.
Yeah. So my condolences if you've already burned your wild cards to a crisp on some of these archetypes, but if you haven't, you're going to want to listen up. Kicking things off.
I appreciate that because I have wasted wild cards on some control cards.
Kicking things off here, Marvel.
It's just not that marvelous.
Oh, you mean wait? Hold on, Aetherworks Marvel.
Aetherworks Marvel, yeah.
Yeah, I mean we don't have to put any respect on its name anymore. It's not standard. It got banned, and it is absolutely it's trash in this format. I tried it. I tried some matches after we even tried it on Versus. It's so bad.
This deck is a tier 1 trap. Don't waste your mythics on this card. The deck is not good. It's super easy to hate. Everybody's already prepared to hate out this deck without even trying. And your alternative game plan is really bad.
Yeah, that's the main difference, is that it's just as inconsistent / just as over the top as it was in Standard. But in Standard, the energy backup plan was somewhat respectable. And in Historic, it just doesn't quite keep up.
Yeah. Also, it's kind of tertiary plan of just casting an Ulamog. I mean, you're just never getting there. You're going to die. Look at all the decks we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
They're all so aggressive. You're not going to get there in time.
The only time I've lost to a Marvel deck is I was brewing a very slow and medium control deck, and I forgot about the age-old sideboard plan. So when I took out all my removal, I just got smashed by Long Tusk Cubs and Bristling Hydra.
Unfortunate.
But
I played against an interesting version of Marvel the other day that was playing Gyruda. As you can Marvel type Gyruda, mill over an Ulamog, put that into play. It did some cool stuff like that, but I smashed that deck. It wasn't good. So there are people trying out weird stuff, but it's, Marvel is, I know people were a little bit worried because it's not a fun play experience, but the card's just not good enough for Historic, so you can put your worries to rest.
Yeah, and they're never going to start adding energy cards, so there's nothing like you have to be concerned about moving forward.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Another deck that I saw a few people tweeting about saying that the deck was good, Blue-Black Control. And let me tell you, it's not good, guys. It's not.
Okay, so I understand why people worked on it because I worked on it, and I understand what they see in it. Thoughtseize, push, eliminate, Heartless Act, etc. Like you have very efficient removal now that you can use. And then using that, you can just play a control game plan, whether you want your end game to be like Shark Typhoons or whether you're trying to play Torrential Gearhulk, whatever you're trying to do. The early game that a control needs to survive gained a lot from Fatal Push. The problem, though, I think, is that people are still trying to build it a bit too much like the deck existed in Standard, like the Torrential Gearhulk decks were. They're all playing like Disallows or Neutralize or Sinister Sabotage, like whatever version of cancel they choose. And I don't think you really have time to be casting that spell in Historic. And additionally, that removal that I mentioned doesn't include anything that answers Planeswalkers. And so like your best option to kill a Planeswalker is to either counter it, but that's not always guaranteed, or they cost like 4 mana. You're playing something like Vraska's Contempt or Eat to Extinction, or you're kicking a Bloodchief's Thirst. And so like that is already going to put you behind. Like you can't let Anissa make a 3/3 and then spend 4 to kill it while you get bashed by a 3/3. I don't know. I feel like maybe there is something there in the control strategy, and maybe it's a bit more tap out control. Because remember, that's what we saw happen to control decks in Standard that had to play against Uro and Nissa, etc. They kind of moved away from counterspells. And I think people are tricking themselves by trying to go back to counterspells in Historic. And the format's even less welcome to them than Standard was.
100% agree with all your points.
The other thing is that control decks kind of need windows to exist in a game where they can resolve card advantage spells to like keep the 1-for-1 train sustainable. And I haven't found that there are like good turns for that. Like when Gearhulk decks existed in Standard, more or less you could get away with casting a Glimmer on turn 4. Sometimes people were casting Gideons, sometimes they were casting something else that you had to worry about, but more or less you could get away with it. And that allowed you to, get the 2 cards you needed, it put something in the bin so that you could Gearhulk for more cards later. And I found that there isn't really a good card advantage engine. Like I've tried to play Search for Iskana in Historic. It takes forever to flip, and then it costs a lot of mana, and you're just dying in the meantime. So it's kind of a mulligan. Glimmer seems kind of slow, like with how impactful and fast some of these aggressive decks are. Like 4 mana, even though a 4 mana draw, like Scry 2, Draw 2 is an okay rate, it's hard to find time for that. And so I'm not sure, like Teferi 5, if you're playing blue-white, if you want to go Esper or something, is obviously very good. But even that is kind of hard to protect in the face of a lot of these aggressive strategies. Yeah, I don't know. It just feels like the format, as I mentioned way at the beginning, the more efficient the format gets, the harder it's going to be for control decks with big finishers and slow counter spells and slow card draw spells to keep up.
Like these decks are trying to win with Torrential Gearhulk, and they're just not good enough to survive that long for that card to be relevant at all. And like there are some cool things this deck can do, flashing back a commit memory with a Narset in play, and your opponent draws 0 and you draw 7, or there's cool little things you can do that like that, but
they're just not consistent
Yeah.
enough. I've been trying to play with Sublime Epiphany because that card's just insane.
yeah,
With
obviously,
Gearhulk, and it's a ton of fun, but it's like slow and inconsistent, and the prevalence of Thoughtseize is also hard for you to deal with. Like if they just Thoughtseize your Gearhulk, then your hand has nothing left. You cast all your removal, and then you're both top decking.
yeah. Like as sweet as Sublime Epiphany Torrential Gearhulk is, like those cards cost 6 mana, and you have to be doing something pretty good to survive that long, and I just don't think it's there.
And the threats are so over the top / snowbally in this format. Well, decks have threats that are so singularly powerful that like you don't have the luxury that control decks usually rely on of choosing to let things resolve because you can answer them in other ways. Like if you're top decking and you don't draw a counterspell the turn you need it, and they draw a Muxus or a Nissa or a Krasis or a Collected Company or a Bolas's Citadel or a Chandra 4 or a Gideon or, a couple things, you're just going to be behind if you ever do answer it, and you probably won't.
Yep.
So yeah, I don't know what control decks look like or where they need to be going to survive in this format. I don't know what the good win con is. I don't know how you can even start attacking it, because even if you like come up with a control deck that can stay toe to toe in the early game against these aggressive strategies and transition into the late game, it also has to be able to play against Growth Spiral or Uro Krasis. And that demands almost entirely different things out of a control deck. So I'm not sure. Maybe Sultai just is the most controlling deck the format can support.
It might be just because the mana cost is low enough. That's all it really comes down to, I think.
The mana cost of what?
Like the Sultai deck, like all the removal spells, Uro, like its late game is 3-drop ramp. Like everything is costed low in the Sultai list. That's probably why it's the only control deck that can really get away with, existing in the meta currently.
Yeah. The fact that Uro is ramp, which buffers your life total to get you to Nissa. It's not trying to cast much over 5 mana. I mean, sometimes it's casting a huge Krasis, but it doesn't have to. And then, it's like late game is a 4 mana 6/6 that is sort of always in their hand. It's very powerful.
All right. Wrapping up the trap tier here. We have Mono Brown. This deck has taken a couple forms, but the main core is you're playing a lot of 2 mana artifacts that make mana. You're playing Karns. You're playing Forsaken Monument, and you're ramping into Big Ugin or Ulamog or something stupid like that. And this deck just cannot beat an aggro deck to save its life. And you're going to be spending a lot of precious wild cards to do something goofy like this. And I realize that this deck is sweet. And what it's doing is pretty sweet. But with how popular aggro decks are in the format are right now, you can't win.
There's just no removal spells in like in colorless.
Well, yeah, you're in mud. There can't be.
Yeah. So you got to hope that you ramp faster than they attack you. And that's a big ask.
Yeah. That Bomat Courier your opponent plays on turn 1 is going to draw 6 cards. And
Yeah,
you have to be okay with that.
Yeah, and it has lightning strikes and shocks behind it, so you're never going to be okay with it. You can resolve all the Ugins you want; they'll just burn you out. And then the Ugin can't even minus to kill the Bomat.
But Alex, I can play my 4 mana Karn, and then they can't activate their artifacts. Yeah, but that Karn, it comes into play and it's dead. It dies immediately.
Yeah, that's the thing.
How are you protecting that Karn? You're not playing removal or creatures or anything. It's dead.
With Hedron on Archive.
You're going to play it. You're at a -2, and then it dies. And then they're going to draw 6 cards.
So the like mono brown versions, have some weaknesses. There are versions that might try and shore this up. Like I've seen the artifact ramp Ugin Ulamog strategies playing red, where you can play like Abrades and Strikes or whatever. You can play Storm's Wrath to try and bridge those gaps.
Yeah, I've seen white versions as well with like Glass Caskets, versions. Wrath of Gods. I think if you're trying to do that, those are probably that's definitely the way you'd want to go instead of just mono brown. But
yeah, it makes the Forsaken Monuments worse though, because now your lands don't all tap for double. So I don't know.
Yeah, those versions of the deck
there to be salvaged, but
those versions of the deck I haven't seen playing Forsaken Monument.
Yeah, I don't think you can.
To be fair, I think Forsaken Monument is a trap though.
Oh, speaking of artifact decks, what is this Paradox Engine combo I've heard about?
It's the same deck. Exact same deck. Plays it alongside Forsaken Monument and all the mana rocks, and it just makes a shit ton of mana.
Because like I played against it once, and they were only untapping like 2 mana rocks, and it
It's not
kind of medium.
It's not good.
Fair enough.
Yeah, my opponent cast one of those, and then they died. It's
Yeah, there's like no shortage of like, goofy turn 6 combo decks with 3 pieces in Historic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But whether that's where you want to be, that's a whole different discussion.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that wraps up the trap tier. My condolences for your wild cards if you unfortunately built one of these decks, but I hope you're having fun.
I'm going to keep casting Gearhogs. You're not going to stop me.
All right. We can talk a little bit about speculative decks. God Pharaoh's Gift is actually not a deck I've played against, and which is weird because I feel like Mono Black Gift was one of the better decks in the format before Zendikar Rising. It won a couple events. It was pretty popular. I've played against it maybe once in the past couple of weeks, and I beat it pretty easily. I don't really think people are trying to do this thing anymore.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just not popular or what. I played against, so with the addition of Kaladesh, the old blue-white refurbished God Pharaoh Gift is now in the format in its entirety. I played against a version that had included some Dream Trawlers and Skyclave Apparitions alongside the sort of core package. But I only played against it once, and I was not playing a real deck. I was playing mono brown, so I don't really have any commentary there on how it sits in the format, but I just haven't seen much of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like
Luckily,
I said,
it is a graveyard deck that gets around Grafdigger's Cage. It doesn't actually bring back the creatures, so like you're not worried about that.
yeah, pretty big win for God Pharaoh's Gift there. It can easily play Grafdigger's Cage to hate out the other important decks in the format while not hurting its own game plan. But yeah, I think the God Pharaoh's decks are probably just a little bit underpowered for the format, but I'm willing to be wrong here because I love these types of decks. I think they're super fun, but I just haven't really seen anything that's impressed me so far.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's reasonable. And you were playing a lot of them, brewing them.
Like this was before it was in Zendikar Rising. There's actually a YouTube video of Grixis God Pharaoh's Gift deck I was working on. I mean, that deck was super cool. Like, maybe people are just trying to be like too cute with, blue, white, Dream Trawlers, that kind of stuff. Like, you have to have the combo kill if you're God Pharaoh's Gifting. Like, you need to be playing Combat Celebrants, so like you kill your opponent immediately when you put that card into play.
So this, I think, is actually a good point that has kind of been a thread through this episode and that I've been noticing a lot in people's approach to Historic. And it was kind of why I was surprised that Mardu Vehicles turned out to be as playable as it is, in that I think a big mistake a lot of people are making is just rebuilding old standard decks. Like, I've seen people voice the opinion on Twitter that building red-black aggro as it existed in standard is a trap. Building blue-black Gearhulk control as it existed in standard, we already talked about why it's a trap. Building just blue-white God Pharaoh's Gift as it existed in standard is probably not good enough. Marvel as it existed in standard is not good enough. And it's not to say that there aren't versions of decks that play these cards in Historic, but I think it's unrealistic to expect that your port into Historic with a couple cards change is going to be good enough. And that is where a lot of people seem to be starting with archetypes now that Kaladesh has been added. But yeah, Mardu Vehicles, we kind of did that as well. And yeah, I guess an exception to the rule.
All right. Blue-black Rogues. Saw Croaky streaming something like this. I've seen a version of it in the deck dump. I've run into it a couple times on ladder. Nice pickup for Rogues with Glint Sleeve Siphoner from Kaladesh. Also, what is it? Scion of Una was added with one of the, I think it was Jumpstart.
Yeah, something like that.
Una's Blackguard. Another pretty good 2-mana rogue for this archetype. The deck is pretty close to the one that's in standard. And I mean, it's going to win games off, early Thieves Guild Enforcer backed up by Drown in the Loch. Into the Story, absolute powerhouse as well. I think this deck is still a little unproven. I'm not really convinced on it, but I think it has a lot of potential to be pretty good. But
I mean, I guess I misspoke earlier when I said that Marty Vehicles is the only deck to play in a 1-mana 3/2. This one's got it as well.
yeah, good, pretty good stats. 1-mana 3/2. But yeah, I don't know. I've run into it a couple times. It hasn't really impressed me so far.
You know what this deck needs? Torrential Gearhulks.
Stop.
It's got flash.
Easy solution.
Stop it.
You can cast into the story. It'd be nuts.
Yeah, I don't know. I like the version I'm looking at from the magic.gg deck dump. I do like Curious Obsession. So you can sell me on these 1-mana flyers suited up with Curious Obsession. You know, I'm listening. We'll have to, put a pin in this one for the future because I don't know if it's quite there yet, but I wouldn't be surprised to see it doing particularly well in an event this weekend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm curious where it's going to end up.
And
All right. So we talked about a lot of the benefits that cards from Kaladesh have brought to Historic. We talked about the power of, all these new cards that got added, Chandra, whatever. There's been one huge downside, though, with Scrap Heap Scrounger that Stelly had to play through today.
All right. Okay, listen up, folks. Blowout of the week. So I'm playing my green-black henge deck this morning, right? And I get paired against rogues. And we're in a really tight game 3. It's been really back and forth. My opponent attacks me with a Soaring Thought Thief, taps 4 mana, and puts a Zerasan into play. And then they target one of my Rotting Regisaurs in my graveyard with the Zerasan trigger. Luckily for me, I have 2 mana up, and I also have a Scrap Heap Scrounger in my graveyard. So I'm like, okay, this is easy. I get to tap my 2 mana, bring back my Scrap Heap Scrounger, exiling the Rotting Regisaur that's being targeted with the Zerasan, and then I have exactly enough creatures to attack him back and kill him. Unfortunately, I go to bring back my Scrap Heap Scrounger, and my graveyard pops up for the interface, and there's 2 Rotting Regisaurs in my graveyard. And unfortunately for me, there is no indication as to which of those 2 is the one being targeted by Zerasan. So I'm in a bit of a pickle, as you might imagine. So I get out of that Scrap Heap interface. I go into the Zerasan interface, and there it's pretty clear which one it's targeting. There's 2 in my graveyard, one on the left, one on the right. The arrow from the Zerasan is pointing on the one on the left, and it's highlighted. I'm like, okay, so it's that one. Go back to the Scrap Heap interface. No indication at all. Highlighted a whole bunch of stuff. There's literally no way of knowing. So I think to myself, okay, well, in the other interface, it's the card on the left. So maybe it's the one on the left in this one. I'll let you listeners figure out for yourselves if it was, in fact, the one on the left in the other interface. And ponder this for a moment. And then you'll probably come to the conclusion on your own that of course it wasn't the one on the left. And I lost that game because of the stupid interface.
Small indie company, though. It's in beta. It's not their fault, Stelly.
And I'm still tilted about it. And I don't think I'll ever not be tilted about it.
Yeah, that was rough.
So dumb. So dumb. Like, what? First off, crazy that you just can't tell when you're in the Scrap Heap interface. And second off, if it's the left card in the one, why isn't it the left card in the other? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, the weird programming that would have to happen to display your graveyard in a different order doesn't make much sense.
Yeah.
That's the second issue I've heard of people having trouble with either not getting priority or not being able to activate Scrap Heap as they would have liked in paper. Yeah, that card has a couple implementation issues, but that one's rough.
Yeah.
Going from guaranteed win to just losing.
Yeah, so MTG Arena just dunked all over me, and I lost that game, and it was I was not a happy camper.
I don't know why you're mad, Kelly. Magic is a game of variance. You just missed a 50-50.
All right. On that note, thank you all for joining the club this week. Don't forget, November 21st, this Saturday, noon Eastern, DWC Take Our Money series, historic, double a limb, winner takes all. Come battle us. Try and steal our money. I'm going to tell you, though, it's going to be a hard time. But if you manage to beat any of us during the event, you'll get yourself an arena code. And don't forget, wizardtower.com, your source for all your Magic Signal needs here in Canada. And if you want to stay up to date with our content, you can follow us on Twitter at DWC Podcast 1 for updates on decks we're working on. Whenever we're going live, whenever we post new videos, it's all there. You can also find all of our content right on our website, dwc.gg. And however you listen to the show, whether it's Podbean, iTunes, any podcast app, leave a review, rate the podcast, share it with your friends. Everything helps, keeps this thing growing and bring it to new listeners. Thank you for listening. Catch you next week.
Good Saturday.
Yeah.